At sunrise on a lively morning in Central Park, New York City, the world felt divided between the gleaming lawns that stretched out like velvet and the quiet presence of a barefoot kid lingering near the path. Robert was used to these kinds of contrasts, but that day there was something about the boy's gaze that caught him off guard. Robert was there pushing Max, his loyal golden retriever, in a wheelchair, a sight that usually kept curious people at a distance. But the boy was different. He walked right up to them, eyes full of determination, and said, "Sir, I can make your dog walk again." For a second, time froze. Robert stared, torn between rolling his eyes at what sounded like a wild claim and feeling a strange twist of hope inside him. In all these months, not even the best vets in Manhattan had managed that. The silence between Robert and the boy, whose name he'd soon learn was Michael, pulled everyone's attention. Robert prided himself on always having control, always having the answers, always being able to buy a solution. Yet here was a kid with nothing but scruffy jeans and stubborn confidence, offering something no money had been able to bring: real, unfiltered hope. As Michael looked at him, there was no hesitation in those eyes, and right then, the busy world around them seemed to fade away, leaving just the three of them and the unexpected chance that maybe, just maybe, a miracle really could happen between broken hearts and brave little hands. Michael didn't hesitate, even as Robert sized him up carefully, his professional guarded stare almost as sharp as his tailored suit. Michael spoke in a quiet but stubborn voice. "Let me try. If I can get Max to move just one paw today, you'll give me a real shot at helping him. I'll need access to the best therapy you can get, and maybe some help too." It sounded simple, but the promise carried much more weight than either was willing to say out loud. For Robert, trusting a street kid felt reckless, totally out of character. His life in Manhattan had taught him to be wary, especially of people who made big promises with nothing to back them up. Still, Robert had run out of ideas, out of treatments, and maybe out of excuses not to try something, anything, different. With a stiff nod, Robert agreed. "All right, but just one paw," he said, his voice flat but his eyes almost hopeful. The deal hung in the air, a strange bridge between their worlds. While Michael felt a rush of nerves, there was a tiny spark inside him, whispering that maybe he actually deserved this chance. For both of them, it was no longer just about Max's legs. Something had shifted, opening space for trust and change neither had thought possible. The first therapy sessions took place right there under the shade of Central Park's old trees. Michael crouched on the grass, speaking gently to Max as people wandered by, some curious, others just in a rush to get to work. He used whatever scraps of knowledge he'd picked up from time spent watching YouTube videos at the library and from handling stray dogs in the neighborhood. His hands worked slowly and patiently over Max's back legs, massaging and stretching, talking all the while as if the dog could understand every word. At first, Max seemed almost numb, his eyes distant, responding only with a tired sigh. But Michael didn't give up. Instead, he worked with more care, always pausing to see if Max reacted. Then, without any warning, something remarkable happened, a faint twitch of Max's tail. It was easy to miss, but both Robert and Michael saw it. Robert actually blinked in disbelief, his usual hard expression suddenly shaken. For so long, he had told himself that hope was for fools, but watching Max's tail move, even just a little, chipped away at those walls. Suddenly, imagining Max running again didn't feel like a joke. That small sign changed something in all three of them. Robert found himself wanting to trust this boy, and Michael dared to believe he could actually help. With each session, the invisible string between them grew tighter, stitching together three souls who had lost faith in miracles and were finding, step by step, a new reason to hope. The sight of Max's slow recovery soon drew attention from more than just casual passers-by. Regulars at Central Park started pausing to watch, chatting quietly about the barefoot kid who seemed to have a special way with dogs. One afternoon, a well-known veterinarian, Dr. Heather Collins, happened to be out for a jog and stopped to see what everyone was talking about. Dr. Collins was something of a local celebrity in New York City due to her TV segments on animal care, and people eagerly listened as she approached Robert and Michael. After a brief look at Michael's methods, Dr. Collins shook her head. She didn't mince words, saying loudly, "This is not real physiotherapy. Letting a child play at medicine is irresponsible and could hurt your dog." The words hung in the air, sharp and dismissive, and a few people nodded along with her. Robert felt a wave of doubt crash over him. The excitement he'd just started to let himself feel evaporated. For months he'd depended on science and professionals, and now, faced with public criticism and the reputation of Dr. Collins, it felt like hope was not just foolish, but dangerous. He turned to Michael, his face hardening again. "I'm sorry, but you need to leave Max alone," he said, voice heavy. Michael's eyes filled with tears, but he wouldn't give up. He stayed nearby, watching from a distance as Robert rolled Max away. Even with everyone telling him he was wrong, Michael's mind raced with ways to prove that heart and perseverance could sometimes beat expertise and titles. He promised himself, right then, that he would find a way back and finish what he had started. Even though Robert had ended things officially, Michael wasn't ready to give up. Every few days he would slip back into Central Park, sticking to the quieter paths and blending in with the weekday crowds. With autumn settling in, the park grew calmer. Golden leaves drifted down and made soft piles that muffled footsteps. These crisp mornings became a perfect cover for Michael's secret sessions with Max. The two would meet in the far corner by the boating lake, out of sight of the benches where Robert usually sat. Michael brought homemade treats and scrapped together toys, doing his best to keep Max's spirits up while working carefully through their exercises. Over time, Michael felt a strange mix of excitement and pressure. Each time Max gave a little more effort, rolling onto his side, managing a small wag, or shifting his foot to reach a treat, Michael's determination only deepened. The rules of their game changed too. Glancing over his shoulder, Michael worried someone might spot them and tell Robert. Still, the hope that Max could really walk again gave Michael more courage than he had ever known. As daylight faded early and the leaves began to pile higher, Michael promised himself he wouldn't let fear stop him, not when something so good might still be possible for all three of them. Eventually, what Michael had been dreading happened. One chilly Saturday morning, while Michael guided Max gingerly through another round of stretches and small steps behind a thick curtain of maple trees, Robert walked right into the scene. Michael's heart jumped, and he almost dropped the pouch of treats he'd brought. He was fully expecting Robert to shout or even call security, but nothing like that happened this time. Instead, Robert just stood there, staring in disbelief at what was happening. Max, shaky but determined, was taking slow, deliberate steps, his paws pressing into the leaves as Michael cheered him on with every inch. For a moment, the city noise faded, and the world narrowed down to the dog, the boy, and the man who watched silently. Robert's sense of betrayal faded, replaced by something like awe as he took in the real progress. He realized he had misjudged Michael, not just once, but from the very beginning. The boy's dedication and patience were paying off in a way none of the professionals could manage. It was a quiet, powerful moment that knocked down the last walls between them. Robert's eyes stung a little, something he'd never admit, and he finally saw Michael as more than a kid from the streets, but as someone who really could change things through heart and hard work. That new understanding hung in the air, fragile but real, as winter pressed in around the park. Word of Max's, Progress moved quickly through the park regulars and even made its way onto a neighborhood Facebook group. People started stopping Robert and Michael just to ask about the dog, while parents pointed them out to their own kids. Yet the attention brought new problems. Soon, Maria Brown, the social worker assigned to keep an eye on Michael, heard about the secret training sessions. She had always been strict about rules, and when she learned Michael had been sneaking out to help a dog instead of showing up for check-ins or sometimes missing meals at the shelter, she came down hard. Maria told Michael that if he did not follow the program, she would have to place him and his little sister Emma in a city-run foster home. No more staying together, no more park. Panic set in. Michael, never good at sitting still, grabbed Emma and tried to disappear for a couple of nights, hiding out at a friend's place in Brooklyn. It did not last. Robert, who had noticed Michael's absence and guessed something was wrong, tracked the siblings down after calling in a few favors. When he found them, Michael immediately tried to argue, but he could see from Robert's face that things were different now. Moved by Michael's fear and stubborn hope, Robert started reaching out to his lawyer, using his connections to try to get Michael and Emma a stable situation. That step was more than help. It was a whole new beginning for both the boy and the man who was learning what second chances really meant. From that moment, things between Robert and Michael began to shift. Robert became more than just a distant benefactor. He started showing up not only to the park, but to visit Michael and Emma at the shelter, always bringing something small. Maybe a loaf of bread from the deli or a comic book Michael used to love as a kid. At first, Michael didn't know what to make of it. He was used to looking out for himself, making sure no one got too close. The idea of someone caring enough to put themselves on the line for him was hard to swallow. Part of him felt genuine, gratitude, but another part held back, afraid of becoming dependent or getting hurt if things went wrong. As the weeks passed, Robert and Michael found themselves sharing more than quick greetings. They would sit on the park benches in the late evenings, quietly watching the city lights blink on, and talk about anything that came to mind, from the Knicks' last game to stories about Max's puppy days. Sometimes there would be stretches of silence that neither found awkward. It felt good just to be present together. Both of them, in their own way, were learning how to set aside old fears and let someone in. Those moments, ordinary as they seemed, planted seeds of trust and maybe even a kind of hope that all three, Michael, Emma, and Robert, could belong to something like a family, despite everything they had been through before. As their lives grew more entwined, Max's recovery reached a point where things started to change quickly. Robert's old friend, Susan Lee, a well-regarded physical therapist from Mount Sinai Hospital, started showing up at the park after hearing about Max's progress through social media. One rainy Wednesday, she joined Michael and Robert under the shelter of a big oak tree, watching as Michael coaxed Max through a new set of exercises. Susan didn't criticize. Instead, she watched closely, asking Michael about his methods. After a little while, she smiled and said, "You've got something special here, Michael. How would you feel about working with me side by side?" For the first time, Michael felt seen by an expert, not just tolerated. The teamwork made a difference fast. Max's steps grew steadier, and even people who had seen 100 dogs walk through Central Park stopped to stare as he built up confidence. But progress didn't mean everything was easy. Some days, Max pushed too hard or limped away from a session, clearly hurting. Michael started lying awake at night, worrying he had gone too far, that he was letting his excitement win over caution. He looked at Susan and asked her quietly if it was his fault. Facing that fear made Michael realize the work wasn't just about trust or skill. It was about learning when to stop out of love, not just hope, and Michael struggled to balance both as the days ticked by. Winter crept into New York, blanketing Central Park with ice and cutting winds that made every outdoor session with Max painful for everyone involved. Just walking to the meeting spot was hard enough, and most days Michael found his fingers numb and his breath coming out in smoky clouds before he had even pulled Max's leash from his pocket. The cold sapped Max's energy too, making each step more difficult and every success feel fragile. Michael spent long evenings feeling worried he would lose all they had gained, and a deep sense of responsibility pressed in on him. Susan, with her years of experience, quietly admitted that without a warm, steady place to work, Max's progress could stall or even slip backward. Seeing how worn and anxious Michael had become, Robert called both Michael and Emma aside one afternoon. He offered something Michael could hardly believe. "Why don't you both come stay at my place? There's more than enough room, and we can set up a proper spot for Max. You won't have to worry about the weather." At first, Michael hesitated, nervous at the idea of moving into someone else's home, especially someone like Robert. But the need for Max outweighed his pride. After talking it over with Emma, and with a little encouragement from Susan, Michael agreed. They moved into Robert's brownstone a few days later, starting a strange, hopeful new kind of family rhythm. Moving into Robert's brownstone on the Upper West Side was like landing in a different world for Michael and Emma. The building was so quiet you could actually hear your own breath, and the warmth inside made every other place Michael had ever slept seem even colder by comparison. There was always enough food in the kitchen, and someone had thought to put fresh sheets on their beds before they arrived. The doors locked with a gentle click, not a heavy chain or padlock, and Michael found himself double-checking them anyway, old habits refusing to fade. Emma settled in a little, faster. For the first time in a long while, she could sleep through the night without waking up to sirens or loud voices from the street. Thanks to Robert's help, she got appointments with one of the top pediatricians in Manhattan. The doctors took their time with her, and soon Emma was on medication she actually needed, not just something from a free clinic. Michael watched her color return day by day and felt relief mixed with worry, as if this sudden safety might vanish overnight. All of it was so different from what they were used to that Michael sometimes felt like they were just guests, fragile and temporary. He longed to trust it, but couldn't shake the quiet fear that maybe someone would decide they did not belong and ask them to leave, shattering this new, delicate hope. Within the warmth of Robert's home, something began to shift for all of them. Mornings started with coffee brewing and Emma calling out for scrambled eggs just the way she liked. Max would wait at the bottom of the stairs, tail thumping, ready for whoever wanted to give him a morning scratch. They would gather around the kitchen island, Emma carefully measuring out her medicine, Robert reading headlines from the New York Times, Michael quietly soaking in the normalcy as if it might break if he spoke too loudly. Sometimes Susan joined them for Sunday dinners, bringing over homemade dumplings that made even Robert laugh at how bad his own cooking was in comparison. Everyday things, folding laundry together, finding lost shoes, arguing over which show to watch, began to stitch the four of them together bit by bit. Michael started to feel a small, surprising sense of belonging. It was not the grand gestures, but the small ones. A squeeze on the shoulder, a joke at the dinner table, the way Robert checked if Emma had brushed her teeth before bed. That meant the most. And yet, Michael struggled to trust it fully. Moments of happiness sometimes left him on edge, guilt curling in his stomach. He worried he did not deserve this life, and that maybe, any minute, someone would knock at the door and send them back to the world they came from. Even so, with every shared meal and laugh, hope grew stronger, fighting with the shadows of his past. Just as Michael was getting used to the rhythms of his new life, a problem came creeping in from a place he had never expected. Robert, who always seemed steady and sure, came home one afternoon, looking tired and distracted. Over dinner, he explained that the board of the Lewis Foundation, his non-profit that supported homeless kids all across New York, was putting real pressure on him to shut everything down. The foundation was not making as much money as it used to, and some of the wealthier board members wanted to cut their losses. Robert tried to keep his voice calm, but Michael could tell this news was eating at him. The thought gnawed at Michael for days. He could not shake the idea that by living with Robert and taking up space, and even more by letting Emma get the care she needed, he was making things worse. Maybe the money spent on them was what the board was upset about. Maybe, if they disappeared, the foundation could go on helping other kids like him. Michael started to pull away, staying longer at the park with Max and dodging Robert's questions. At dinner, guilt laid heavy on him, a silent weight growing each day. He even thought about leaving, but the idea of dragging Emma back to the streets made his chest ache. Michael was trapped between wanting to protect Emma and not wanting to be the reason everything good in their lives disappeared. Things began to change again when the first warm days of spring reached New York. The air felt lighter, and sunlight poured through the windows of Robert's brownstone, breathing energy back into everyone. After months of work, Max finally took his first real steps with the help of special support Susan had ordered just for him. Michael was right there, cheering as Max wobbled across the living room, his tail wagging harder than ever before. Emma clapped her hands in delight. Robert blinked away tears, and even Susan found herself laughing through her happy sobs. It felt like a miracle, and in those minutes, none of their past struggles mattered. They celebrated with pizza and ice cream, letting Emma pick the flavors. And for the first time in a long while, Michael felt fully present in his own happiness, not looking over his shoulder for the next bit of bad news. But life did not hit pause just because they found something good. Only a week later, Robert called Michael and Emma into his study. He looked almost apologetic as he shared the news. A company in England was offering him a position to lead an important expansion there. The chance was huge, something Robert had always talked about in passing, but hearing it out loud changed everything. The idea of leaving this unusual family behind, breaking apart what they had built, filled the house with a quiet worry that no one really knew how to name. When Michael realized that this new chapter might end just as he was starting to feel safe, it shook him more than he expected. He found Robert in the kitchen late. One night, washing dishes and staring out the window, Michael blurted out what he had been holding in. "You can't just leave. Emma and we don't have anywhere else to go. This isn't just a house for us, it's all we've got." His voice cracked, and he hated sounding so desperate, but the thought of Emma being pulled from the only routine that finally worked for her was too much. Robert set the plate down and really looked at him, and Michael saw his own fear mirrored in the older man's face. Robert explained quietly that this job could secure a future for a lot of people, but that did not mean letting go was easy for him either. The conversation went on for hours, shifting from angry, pleading words to quiet confessions neither had shared before. Robert told Michael that he believed he deserved more than just getting by. He wanted Michael and Emma to have access to good schools, safe doctors, and chances he never thought they would get. But Michael's hands shook as he explained that none of that mattered if they did not have each other. Breaking up their small family felt like losing the only real thing he had ever known. The stress in the house grew every day, and everything finally boiled over one rainy evening. Emma started coughing right after dinner, but this time it sounded worse than usual. Her lips turned pale, and her breaths came in sharp, gasping bursts. Michael's panic took over fast. He grabbed her bag and yelled for Robert, who called for an ambulance without wasting a second. The sirens were thunder in Michael's ears as they rushed through wet streets to the hospital, and all he could do was hold Emma's hand, helpless and terrified. At the hospital, doctors moved Emma into a bright room filled with machines. Michael felt lost, barely understanding the medical words thrown around. He watched through the glass, hands pressed to the window, wishing he could do anything to help her. Robert was there every minute. Instead of being on phone calls about investors or business trips, he argued with hospital staff, signed whatever papers were put in front of him, and even called specialists across the city. The decision was not hard for Robert. That night, he told Michael he was selling part of his company. The money would pay for the best care Emma could get, no matter how long it took. Suddenly, business deals and career goals mattered much less than keeping this family together. It was Robert's way of saying, without words, that they were his priority now. Michael felt the shift deep down. Whatever happened next, they would face it as a family, together. While Emma recovered, Robert's house slowly changed. What used to be a place that felt temporary became something special, almost like a real home. The living room filled with get-well cards, some from Emma's class and others from neighbors who had started to check in. Michael hardly left Emma's side, sleeping on the little couch in her hospital room or stretched out by her bed once she was back home. He spoke softly to her at night, telling stories about better days ahead, promising she would not have to go through things alone anymore. Max, as if he understood the seriousness, never wandered far from Emma's room either. Sometimes he would curl up on her feet and just listen as Michael hummed familiar songs to keep her calm. Robert brought trays of soup and sandwiches, and even Susan stopped by more often, helping with whatever needed doing and making sure the family ate real meals. No one mentioned work or foundations, and business calls happened less and less. That scare in the hospital left them all shaken, but something else grew in its place. They became fiercely protective of this small, stitched-together family. Plans for the future were uncertain, but Michael and Robert found strength in each other's presence. The fear of losing what they found shifted to the hope and determination to never let go of this life, no matter what tried to pull them apart. With Emma steadily getting stronger, the energy in Robert's house shifted again, this time toward hope and excitement. The whole family was invited to a big charity event hosted by the Central Park Children's Fund. The atmosphere there was warm, almost buzzing with good intentions, and Michael felt a little out of place at first, but everyone was determined to celebrate how far they had come. Max's moment in the spotlight arrived sooner than anyone expected. As the applause quieted, Michael guided Max onto the stage. Without any help or special supports, Max took steady steps across the platform, his nose held high. The crowd gasped, then erupted in cheers and clapping. Some people even wiped away tears. As Michael knelt beside him, fiercely proud of his friend's courage, it felt like one victory was shared by everyone in the room. Word about what happened at the event spread across New York. Local papers ran stories not just about Max, but about Michael and the family that had stood by his side. Suddenly, people recognized them on the street or stopped to thank Robert for everything he had done. That night, as they walked home together under city lights, Michael realized they had become something bigger, a true family, celebrated and seen with a future wide open ahead of them. After the charity event, stories about Michael's journey spread even further. It was not just Max's courage that caught people's attention, but the quiet strength Michael had shown through every setback. Seeing how much this boy and his little sister meant to him, Robert began to look at his life in a new way. He realized that love and loyalty held more weight than any deal or promotion ever could. He wanted to make sure Michael and Emma knew, without a doubt, that their place in the family was real and permanent. So Robert started the paperwork to adopt both Michael and Emma. When the official day arrived, they held a small ceremony right in their living room. Susan brought flowers, and Max wore a brand new red bandana for the occasion. The judge read out the final decision, but it was Robert's choked-up speech that made the moment unforgettable. He promised to be the steady place they could always call home. Michael was overwhelmed with relief and happiness, and even Emma, who still got tired easily, grinned wide the whole time. They were not bound by old stories or shared blood, but by choice and caring. For the first time, Michael and Emma belonged, really belonged, and their new family felt stronger than anything that came before it. That next spring, New York woke up in colors, trees filling Central Park with fresh leaves and flowers everywhere. You looked. As the days stretched out longer and warmer, the park became the backdrop for a lot of the little celebrations the family created for themselves. One sunny afternoon, Michael walked between Emma and Robert while Max trotted beside them, tail wagging and nose twitching at every new smell. Other families laughed nearby, skateboards zipped down the paved paths, and bursts of music floated from a guitarist near Bethesda Fountain. Michael had grown used to belonging here, not just in the city, but with these people who felt like more than friends or caretakers. They felt like home. Emma skipped ahead, her breath easy and strong, calling back for Michael and Max to catch up. Robert, usually so put together, had his arm draped around Michael's shoulder, smiling in a way that did not need any explanation. For Michael, those small things, belonging, safety, being seen, meant everything. Max chased pigeons without his old limp, Emma giggled until she was out of breath, and Robert promised ice cream before dinner. Central Park, the same place that once held Michael's biggest fears and loneliest days, was now the place where a new chapter started. Everything felt possible, and together they walked into it hand in hand.